Welcome to Vietnam Flow, where the history and soul of Vietnam come alive. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications to join us in spreading the pride of Vietnam. Across the S-shaped land of Vietnam, there are places forever etched into our national memory, immortal notes in a grand symphony of sacrifice and pride. Among those names, one shines brightest whenever it's spoken, a name that stirs deep emotion, reverence, and pride. Dien Bien Phu. Nestled deep within the rugged mountains of the Northwest, Dien Bien Phu, once a seemingly small, quiet valley, became the stage for one of the greatest military victories of the 20th century. There, in 1954, the world stood still in awe of a small nation whose courage and willpower proved stronger than any weapon. On May 7, 1954, the red flag with a golden star emblazoned with the words, "Determined to fight, determined to win," fluttered triumphantly above the bunker of General de Castries. That moment marked not only the collapse of the most fortified stronghold in Indochina, but also the symbolic fall of old-school colonialism across the globe. From the heart of the Dien Bien Valley, the echoes of victory spread beyond the Hoang Lien Mountains, across the Pacific and the Atlantic, resonating through Africa and Latin America. The world proclaimed, "A nation that dares to rise, dares to fight, dares to sacrifice, that nation will surely triumph." But to reach that moment of glory, Vietnam endured a long and grueling journey, one paved with blood, tears, and boundless courage. By the early 1950s, the First Indochina War had entered its 8th year. The French colonial army, seasoned and well-equipped, now heavily backed by the United States, still believed it could crush the resistance of a nation newly freed from centuries of oppression. Then came a bold plan, the Henry Navarre Plan. Convinced that establishing an impregnable fortress in the Northwest would lure the Viet Minh's main forces into open battle, the French intended to force a decisive confrontation, a final strike that would break Vietnam's resistance once and for all. So, in late 1953, French transport planes roared across the sky, landing continuously in the basin of Muong Thang, Dien Bien Phu. Wave after wave of foreign legionnaires, paratroopers, and engineers poured into the valley. They built bunkers, trenches, and barbed wire defenses, turning the 20-square-kilometer valley into a colossal fortress divided into 3 sectors, north, central, and south, consisting of 49 strong points, 2 airstrips, and hundreds of artillery pieces, supported by thousands of tons of ammunition and supplies. This was the fortress they believed to be impregnable. The French proudly called it a steel fortress in the jungles of Indochina, believing that no force on earth could ever break through. American generals who came to inspect the site even praised it as one of the most formidable defensive systems in the world at that time. They were convinced that the Viet Minh, a peasant army wearing rubber sandals and carrying outdated rifles, could never overcome such a wall of steel. But they forgot one truth. No weapon is stronger than the will of the people, and they never understood the true power behind 2 simple words: Vietnam. While the French were loudly proclaiming this as their final decisive battle, deep in the forests of Viet Bac, the General Command of the People's Army of Vietnam was quietly drawing up plans for a campaign that would go down in history. At the heart of it all stood General Vo Nguyen Giap, the legendary commander entrusted by President Ho Chi Minh with the fateful mission. This battle is of great importance. We must win. If victory is certain, we fight. If victory is uncertain, we do not fight. In the early days of January 1954, the general and his staff spent sleepless nights weighing every option, analyzing each possibility. Initially, based on the situation at the time, the campaign's guiding strategy was fight quickly, win quickly. The aim was to capitalize on the element of surprise,
concentrate overwhelming firepower, strike swiftly, and annihilate the enemy before they could fortify their positions. But war seldom unfolds according to human plans. As our troops hold heavy artillery into position, dragging 105mm cannons weighing several tons over treacherous mountain passes, through mud and rain using nothing but bamboo ropes and human strength, General Giap realized a harsh truth. If we attacked in haste, our losses would be catastrophic. If we rushed into battle, the entire campaign could collapse. And so, on a cold winter night, inside a small hut deep in the forest, General Vo Nguyen Giap made a historic decision, one he would later call the hardest decision of my entire command career. He ordered a temporary halt to the assault, changing the campaign's motto from fast attack, rapid victory, to steady attack, certain victory. At that time, not everyone agreed. Many officers and soldiers had marched for weeks. The artillery was already in place. Now they had to pull the guns back out, doubling their hardship. But the general understood that victory is not born of recklessness. It comes from wisdom, patience, and careful preparation. He staked not only his reputation, but also his very life on two words: certain victory. The Battle of Dien Bien would later prove that decision to be pure gold. From that moment, the entire army and the entire nation embarked on an unprecedented preparation effort. New roads were carved through the dense mountains of the northwest. Bamboo bridges were built across rivers and streams. Endless columns of civilian porters, men and women, young and old, carried rice, ammunition, and supplies, along with a shared promise: when victory comes, we'll return home, to our fields, to our farms.
The humble bicycles, once thought too simple to matter, became a symbol of Vietnamese willpower and ingenuity. Each bike, reinforced with bamboo, wood, and old tire tubes, could carry up to 200 kilograms of supplies. Those narrow mountain paths soon echoed with the sounds of turning wheels, the rhythmic chants of porters, and the calls of comrades echoing through the forests of Dien Bien. People said that if all of the transport bicycles used that year were lined up end to end, they could form a road stretching from Hanoi to Paris. That image was more than poetic. It was living proof of the spirit of people's war, a strength no modern army could ever comprehend. By March 1954, when every preparation was complete, roads built, supply lines secured, artillery ready, the flag bearing the words "determined to fight, determined to win" was raised high, and our cannons roared in unison. The first artillery shells thundered over Him Lam, marking the beginning of 56 days and nights that shook the world. But before diving into the fierce battles, let us pause to ask, how could such a small nation achieve such a miracle? The answer did not lie in weapons, but in faith. Not in fortifications, but in people. Dien Bien Phu was the crystallization of willpower, patriotism, and the unity of an entire nation. It was a place where every citizen, even those far from the battlefield, became a soldier in spirit. Women carrying rice through the jungle, old men hauling ammunition across rivers, young messengers delivering letters through bombs and fire, each played their part in the victory. That was the power of the people as the foundation, the people as the masters. And that lesson, even after more than 70 years, remains just as vital today. As the world transforms each day, as Vietnam enters the age of digital transformation and Industry 4.0, we still need that same spirit, the Dien Bien Phu spirit of the new era. The courage to face hardship, to innovate, to take bold steps on our own path. March, when the white ban flowers bloom across the northwest mountains, is also the season when every Vietnamese heart turns toward Dien Bien, with pride and deep gratitude. That victory belonged not just to an army, but to an entire people, to millions of hearts beating as one for independence, for freedom,
for the fatherland of Vietnam. From that victory, Vietnam emerged onto the world stage, not as a poor, backward nation, but as a brave and indomitable people. From the heart of the Dien Bien Alley, a message echoed across all borders. No power on earth, no matter how mighty, can ever crush the Vietnamese people's yearning for independence and freedom. More than 7 decades have passed, yet whenever we speak of Dien Bien Phu, we remember not only the triumph, but the people. The fearless soldiers who vowed to die for the fatherland's survival. The selfless porters who braved the jungle fires. The bloodied hands that still pulled the artillery ropes with unwavering grip. The tears and laughter interwoven amid the smoke and flames, all for a single dream: peace and freedom for Vietnam.
Dien Bien Phu was not just a battle, it was a symphony of faith, courage, and the yearning for freedom. And now, let us journey back in time to those historic days of March 1954, to relive each glorious moment, each thunderous artillery blast, each fiery trench where the Vietnamese people wrote one of the golden chapters of the 20th century, Dien Bien Phu, the immortal epic of the century. After the historic decision was made to shift the strategy from fight quickly, win quickly, to steady attack, certain victory, the Dien Bien Phu campaign entered an entirely new phase. It was no longer a short, decisive clash between two armies, but a test of endurance, intellect, and national willpower. From the forests of the northwest, new roads stretched endlessly into the mountains. Lines of people, trucks, ox carts, and porters carried bullets, rice, salt, and handfuls of boiled rice, silently but steadily crossing steep slopes and dense jungles. Amid the cold drizzle and bone-chilling winds, the footsteps of Vietnamese men and women echoed with unwavering determination. They carried not just supplies, but faith in victory, a conviction that, this time, our nation will make history. In this campaign, the greatest challenge was not ammunition or artillery. It was the road itself. The terrain was treacherous, with slippery slopes, dense forests, and endless mud. Motorized transport was nearly impossible. Yet, in those seemingly hopeless conditions, the Vietnamese army and people performed a miracle, turning the impossible into possible, transforming hardship into triumph. From January 1954, more than 26,000 civilian laborers, most of them peasants, women, and youth, joined the soldiers in building roads and transporting supplies. They called it the Road of Blood to Dien Bien Phu, because along every hill and bend lay footprints, sweat, and sometimes even blood. Columns of porters stretched for kilometers. Some carried, some pushed, some pulled. Even elderly men with white hair begged to join. Let me carry just a bit of rice for the soldiers. Even if I die, I'll die happy. Each step they took beat in rhythm with the nation's heart, which pulsed towards Dien Bien. Among them were young women of the Thai, Hmong, and Dao ethnic groups, wrapped in thin blankets, barefoot, carrying sacks of rice uphill as they sang, "Oh Dien Bien, we come to give our strength, to stand with our people." They had no weapons, no uniforms, yet they were the silent soldiers of the revolution. Without them, without logistics and support, there could have been no victory at Dien Bien Phu.
Each bicycle was carefully and ingeniously modified. Extra bamboo handles were tied to the handlebars for better control under heavy loads. The frames were reinforced with bamboo, wood, and scrap metal. Old cloth and rubber tubes were wrapped around to reduce shock and increase traction. From carrying just 40 to 50 kilograms, these bicycles could now transport 200 to 300 kilograms of supplies. They became known as the Iron Buffaloes of the campaign, quiet yet unyielding. People recalled that on the steep, twisting mountain paths, there were times when a bike overturned, cargo spilled, or a porter fell, but no one was ever left behind. Each fallen wheel was lifted again, each rope retied, and the convoy kept moving forward. Every meter of road was a story, every slope conquered was a victory. According to the Logistics Department's estimates, during the entire Dien Bien Phu campaign, the Vietnamese forces transported more than 25,000 tons of supplies, including 14,000 tons of food, 2,400 tons of ammunition, 1,700 tons of fuel, and tens of thousands of tons of other materials. All of it carried by human hands and human will. No mechanized transport system in the world could have accomplished such a feat under those conditions, but the Vietnamese people did. A French journalist later wrote in his memoirs, "We had airplanes, tanks, and modern logistics, but they, those barefoot peasants, had something we never had, faith and determination." If logistics was the backbone of the campaign, then military strategy was its mind and soul. When the command decided on steady attack, certain victory, they knew this meant rejecting a quick, decisive strike, the kind of battle the enemy wanted. Instead, they would encircle, isolate, and tighten the siege step by step. It would take longer and be harder, but it would ensure victory with fewer losses. The strategy was known as Vây Lun, siege and encroachment, using trenches, fortifications, mines, and artillery to gradually close the circle around the enemy. Each day and night, advancing a few meters, a few dozen meters closer to the enemy's strongholds. When the French forces were completely cut off, deprived of supplies and morale, the decisive blow would be delivered. It was the timeless art of using the small to defeat the great, the few to overcome the many, a continuation of Vietnamese military tradition since the dynasties of Le, Chern, and Lê. It also embodied President Ho Chi Minh's words, "Use benevolence to triumph over cruelty, use righteousness to defeat tyranny." In this campaign, Vietnamese artillery was used on an unprecedented scale. The 105mm and 75mm cannons, many of them captured from the enemy, were hauled by hand and human strength across hundreds of kilometers of rugged jungle terrain. Once in position, the guns were hidden deep inside mountains, camouflaged so skillfully that only the barrels protruded. When they opened fire, the thunder of the guns shook the entire Dien Bien Valley. The French soldiers were stunned. How could they possibly bring artillery up here? How can they fire with such accuracy? They never realized that behind every shell fired was the sweat of hundreds of people and the brilliance of Vietnamese combat engineers who had turned the mountains and forests themselves into fortresses of resistance.
Our artillery roared, our infantry advanced, and our engineers dug trenches. The entire Dien Bien Phu Valley became a vast construction site of war. By day, our soldiers camouflaged themselves to evade enemy aircraft. By night, they dug trenches, moved cannons, and carried ammunition. Those trenches, stretching over 100 kilometers, were like a steel spiderweb encircling the entire Muang Thang Valley. From that intricate network of trenches, our troops inched closer to each French stronghold, from Him Lam to Dop Lap, then to the eastern hills, cutting off supply routes, disabling the airfield, and completely isolating the enemy garrison. Our artillery did more than just support the infantry. It worked hand in hand with anti-aircraft units, controlling the entire Dien Bien airspace. The French air bridge was severed, and much of their airdropped supplies fell directly into our hands. The so-called impregnable fortress of Dien Bien Phu was slowly turning into a deadly trap. At the center of every decision stood the brilliant mind of General Vo Nguyen Giap, a man who had never studied at any military academy, yet was hailed worldwide as the Red Napoleon. Even his adversaries revered him, calling him the People's General. General Vo Nguyen Giap understood that in war, one may lose a battle, but one must never lose faith. He held firmly to his principle: only fight when victory is certain, even under immense pressure from both domestic and international fronts. That clarity and steadfastness led the campaign to its ultimate triumph. At that time, Vietnamese soldiers had little more than courage, conviction, and song. Amid rain and bombs, they still sang, "Pull the cannons over hills and passes, over rivers and mountains." That chant became the anthem of the Vietnamese spirit, echoing through smoke, thunder, and the skies of Dien Bien Phu. Even as shells exploded and the ground trembled, laughter and humor persisted. As long as we live, we fight, and as long as we fight, we win. That was the Vietnamese spirit, humble yet magnificent. The victory of Dien Bien Phu was not merely a military triumph, it was the victory of an entire nation. From the lowlands to the highlands, from the Red River Delta to the distant mountains, every heart turned toward Dien Bien Phu. People from Hanoi, Thái Bình, Nghệ An, and countless other regions donated rice, clothing, and food. Behind the front lines, civilians wove nets, sewed uniforms, cooked meals, and sent them to the soldiers. The supply porters, many of them women, were affectionately called the Long-Haired Army. Some never returned. Some bore wounds for the rest of their lives, yet no one complained. For in their heart there was only one conviction: if the fatherland needs me, I am ready. That is the essence of the Vietnamese soul: simple, modest, yet extraordinary. From logistics to strategy, from artillery to civilian labor, all elements fused into one mighty force: the power of the people's will. It was this very power that made the impossible possible, that defeated Europe's strongest army at the time, that shattered an impregnable fortress with nothing but determination and faith. Dien Bien Phu was not just a battle, it was a miracle of humankind, proving forever that no power on earth is greater than the power of patriotism and the human spirit.
And was from those ordinary people, with their humble transport bicycles, their calloused hands pulling cannons, and their sweat-soaked footprints in the forests of the Northwest, that a great victory was born, a victory forever remembered by the world, Dien Bien Phu, where will became strength and the people forged history. The battle begins. In the next part of this story, we enter the 56 fiery days and nights where every inch of Dien Bien soil bore the footprints of Vietnamese soldiers, where the thunder of cannons, bombs, and battle cries fused into a symphony of steel and blood, ushering our nation into one of the most glorious moments of the 20th century. March 1954. The entire Northwest trembled with the roar of the wind, the drone of planes, and the rumble of artillery echoing through the Muang Thang Valley. After more than 2 months of preparation, the decisive strategic battle between a small nation and a colonial empire had officially begun. Under the command of General Vo Nguyen Giap, the campaign headquarters issued the order: "Everything is ready. The decisive moment for our nation's independence has come. Attack firmly, advance steadily, annihilate the enemy forces at Dien Bien Phu." The first attack. At 5 p.m. on March 13, 1954, the entire valley of Dien Bien Phu erupted in flames and thunder. Hundreds of cannons fired simultaneously. Explosions shook the mountains. Columns of smoke rose skyward, tearing through the dark clouds of the Northwest. The sound of Vietnamese artillery, once dismissed by the French as impossible, now echoed across the entire battlefield. Our guns targeted the Him Lam stronghold, the steel gate of northern Dien Bien Phu. After 4 hours of relentless bombardment, the French defenses were shattered. At 7 p.m., our infantry launched a full assault. Young soldiers, barely 18 or 20 years old, charged through enemy fire, shouting, "Forward, determined to fight, determined to win." By 11:30 p.m., Him Lam was completely annihilated. Major Pirath, the French artillery commander, took his own life in despair inside his bunker. The next day, our forces captured Doc Lap and Ban Kiao. Within just 5 days, the entire northern wing of the French fortress complex was wiped out. The gate to Dien Bien Phu had been opened. The sky over Dien Bien blazed red with the light of victory. The battle intensifies. After the initial victories, our army tightened the siege. The French launched desperate counterattacks, pouring their firepower into defending the Muang Thang central sector. Fighting raged fiercely. Every trench, every bunker, every hill was soaked in blood. The hills C1, D1, E, A1, and C2 became immortal names in Vietnamese military history. There, every meter of land was bought with the blood of Vietnamese soldiers. On Hill C1, within just 10 minutes of battle, the red flag with a golden star fluttered atop the summit. But the French counterattacked ferociously. Our troops fought hand to hand, with bayonets, rifle butts, and grenades. Gunfire, explosions, and battle cries merged into one. An hour later, C1 was completely ours. On Hill A1, the heart of the French defense, the fighting was even more brutal. The hill was steep, the terrain difficult, the fortifications solid. Each day and night, our soldiers dug new trenches, gaining a few more meters toward the summit. At night, the darkness was absolute, broken only by muzzle flashes and flares descending from the sky. The soldiers fought and dug, shedding both sweat and blood. Many fell, but the cry forward never ceased to echo. The Blood Oath. On Hill D1, a young soldier from Nha Gian province, mortally wounded, lay in the trench clutching the national flag. He whispered to his comrades, "If I don't make it, plant this flag on the top of the hill." That night, his comrades fulfilled his last wish. The next morning, amid the smoke and fire, the red flag with a golden star soared high above the battlefield, fluttering in the thunder of our guns. It was a blood oath, a promise sealed by a generation that fought for freedom. Dien Bien Phu, a name that still echoes through time, where ordinary men and women achieved the extraordinary, and where a nation once enslaved rose to claim its destiny.
We would rather die than retreat. The French bombed relentlessly. Their artillery thundered day and night. Rain poured, the earth collapsed, trenches caved in. Yet our network of trenches rose again and again, like a web of steel, stretching over 100 kilometers around the valley. Each night, thousands of meters of new trenches were dug. In some places, soldiers dug lying flat to avoid bullets. In others, the ground was soaked, the water reaching their knees. But no one left their post. Everyone knew, if they stepped back, their comrades behind them would die. The battle for Hill A1. From early April 1954, our army launched continuous assaults on Hill A1, the key position defending the French command headquarters. But the enemy fought stubbornly. Their bunkers were reinforced with layers of concrete, connected by tunnels, supported by tanks and artillery. Our troops attacked dozens of times. Some units were almost completely wiped out, yet the hill still stood. Unyielding, the campaign command made a daring decision: to dig a secret tunnel beneath the hill and plant explosives to destroy the enemy fortifications from below. 25 combat engineers worked day and night in total darkness. They breathed through bamboo tubes, used candles for light, and with every pickaxe swing came drops of sweat and blood. Every shovelful of soil had to be hidden carefully to avoid detection. After more than a month of grueling work, the tunnel was complete. On Mites.
At 9 p.m., the signal was given. A deafening explosion shook the mountains. The entire Hill A1 erupted like a volcano, smoke and fire surging into the night sky. Our artillery opened up a massive barrage. Our infantry charged forward. After 5 hours of fierce combat, by dawn on May 7th, Hill A1 was completely captured. The French lines collapsed. Their main defense in Dien Bien Phu was destroyed. Hill A1 became a symbol of the Vietnamese spirit. 1 hill, 30 assaults, thousands of lives lost. But in the end, human will triumphed over steel and fire. As dawn broke, Vietnamese soldiers smiled through exhaustion, looking down into the Muang Thang Basin, where the red flag with the yellow star was about to rise. The final offensive. May 1st, 1954. The final assault began. Our artillery pounded the Muang Thang central stronghold. One enemy position after another fell. C1, C2, 506, 507, all were destroyed. By the morning of May 7th, our forces were just hundreds of meters from General de Castries' command bunker. At 3 p.m., the order was given. All units advance. Eliminate all remaining enemy forces in Muang Thang. Artillery thundered, rifles cracked, grenades flared. Our units attacked from all directions, tightening the encirclement. The French were in chaos. Many fled. Others raised their hands in surrender. At 5:30 p.m., Captain Ta Quoc Lut and his comrades stormed the command bunker. Before them stood General de Castries and his staff, pale, defeated. Speaking in French, Ta Quoc Lut declared, "You have lost. Surrender. Order your troops to lay down their arms." At 5:45 p.m., de Castries surrendered unconditionally. Moments later, the flag of "Determined to fight, determined to win" was raised over the enemy headquarters. The entire Dien Bien Phu Valley erupted, with cheers, tears, and song. Our Dien Bien soldiers return, shining in the new sunlight. The cost of victory. After 56 days and nights of digging through mountains, sleeping in trenches, enduring cold rain and dry rations, more than 11,000 French troops were captured. 2,000 were killed, and over 6,000 wounded. On our side, more than 4,000 brave Vietnamese gave their lives, and thousands more were wounded. But independence and freedom were secured through blood, faith, and love for the fatherland. The world trembles. On May 8, 1954, just one day after the victory, the Geneva Conference convened. The echo of Dien Bien Phu resounded across the globe. For the first time in history, a colonized nation had defeated the army of a Western empire. Dien Bien Phu was not only a Vietnamese victory, it was a turning point in world history, proving that the power of human will and the fight for freedom can overcome any empire.
From Africa to Latin America, from Southeast Asia to Cuba, oppressed peoples around the world rose up in rebellion. The world's press hailed Vietnam as the torch that lit the path for the national liberation movements of the 20th century. Later, General Charles de Gaulle, when recalling those days, uttered a brief yet bitter truth. Dien Bien Phu, that is where France lost an empire. But for Vietnam, Dien Bien Phu was far more than a military victory. It was the triumph of faith, of unity, and of a nation's indomitable will. From the flames of Dien Bien, a people emerged onto the world stage, proudly proclaiming, "Nothing is more precious than independence and freedom." The victory of Dien Bien became the symbol of the Ho Chi Minh era, an immortal epic of ordinary men and women who achieved the extraordinary. More than 70 years have passed, yet whenever the name Dien Bien is spoken, the hearts of Vietnamese people still swell with deep pride. There, on those hills, in the artillery craters, beneath the forest canopies, the echoes still linger, the cry of "Charge forward!" the call for comrades, the songs of soldiers pulling cannons through the mountains, the unforgettable sounds of a time that shaped our destiny. Dien Bien is not merely a place, it is a spirit, a symbol, an eternal reminder that, when united, the Vietnamese people can never be conquered. Today, in this new era, as our nation strides into the age of digital transformation and innovation, the spirit of Dien Bien Phu continues to guide our path. Just as we once hauled cannons over mountains, we must now overcome all limitations to build a strong, prosperous, and proud Vietnam, standing shoulder to shoulder with nations around the world. Dien Bien Phu does not belong only to the past, it remains a source of strength for the present and the future. O Vietnam, my beloved homeland, from the fires of war we have risen tall. From Dien Bien, that immortal epic, the Vietnamese spirit shall forever shine.
More than 70 years have passed since May 7, 1954. Yet the echoes of Dien Bien Phu victory still resound in every heartbeat of the Vietnamese nation. Each time the words Dien Bien are spoken, pride surges in the hearts of the Vietnamese people. Pride in a nation that turned the impossible into possible. Pride in the ordinary yet extraordinary people who made it happen. And pride that on that very land, the Vietnamese spirit shone like a star illuminating an entire century. The victory at Dien Bien Phu was not only the culmination of 9 years of resistance against the French, but also a turning point in world history in the 20th century. For the first time, a colonized nation, armed with simple weapons, calloused hands, and unbreakable faith, defeated a powerful colonial empire. Dien Bien Phu marked the end of old-style colonialism and ignited the flames of national liberation movements across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Hundreds of millions around the world, upon hearing that the red flag with the golden star had risen over the Mang Thang Valley, wept tears of joy and hope. From that moment, the name Vietnam was no longer merely the name of a country. It became a symbol of courage, of the yearning for independence, and of faith in freedom. And above all, Dien Bien Phu reminds us of an eternal truth. No force on earth can ever subdue a nation united for independence and freedom. That spirit, that indomitable will, remains the everlasting source of strength that has carried Vietnam through every trial of history, from the victory of 1954 to the Great Spring victory of 1975, and today, in this era of peace, construction, and integration, it continues to burn brightly, lighting the path toward a strong, prosperous, and ever-rising Vietnam.
Today, we no longer carry rifles into battle, but before us lie new battlefields. The fight against poverty, backwardness, corruption, and above all, the battle for knowledge and creativity. The spirit of steady attack, certain victory from the old days, remains just as vital in our era of industrialization, digital transformation, and innovation. It is a lesson in strategic thinking, in meticulous preparation, and in perseverant action. As General Vo Nguyen Giap once said, "There is no easy road to glory. To win, one must endure, one must sacrifice." It is also a lesson in faith in the people. For every victory, whether on the battlefield or in nation building, has always sprung from the power of the people, from unity, and from shared belief. Every generation of Vietnamese today has its own Dien Bien Phu, a personal struggle defined by the desire to rise, the courage to innovate, the confidence to master technology, the spirit to think boldly, act decisively, and take responsibility, and the belief that Vietnamese people can achieve greatness. Today, as we stand before the monument of Dien Bien victory, watching the national flag flutter proudly over the northwest sky, we do not only remember those who fell, but we also listen to their timeless message. Live in a way worthy of the sacrifices we made. The eternal flame of Dien Bien. More than 70 decades have passed since the victory at Dien Bien Phu, yet its value does not belong only to the past. It remains an eternal source of spiritual strength for every Vietnamese, today and for generations to come. From the fiery trenches of war, we have entered the era of technology, intellect, and global integration. But we still carry the flame of Dien Bien, the flame of courage, determination, and faith in the future. Dien Bien Phu, not just a victory of its time, but an enduring symbol of Vietnam, a heroic, indomitable, resilient, and creative nation. Renowned across 5 continents, shaking the entire world, and forever echoing in the hearts of all Vietnamese as the immortal epic of the century. Disclaimer: all content in this video has been compiled from multiple historical sources, books, public records, and verified research works. Certain details, images, or narratives have been edited, interpreted, or reenacted for illustrative and inspirational purposes, and do not claim absolute accuracy of every figure or event. This video does not represent any government body, organization, or political stance. All information is presented with the sole purpose of education, historical awareness, and honoring the enduring values of the Vietnamese nation.